Welcome back, everybody, to the Tackle Dungeon here on the channel of David Dudley Outdoors. And yes, today's topic is going to be the thickness of gauge of the hooks that you might be using or not using. We're going to dispel some myths, maybe that gauge doesn't really matter, or maybe gauge does matter. We're going to get into when to use thick gauges, when to use thinner gauges, and if you're not knowing what I'm talking about, gauge means thickness of hook, okay? So very obvious, this is a thin hook, this is a thick hook. We're going to talk about applications of when to choose one versus the other. It's a lot to talk about, and you know, there's a lot of myths out about gauge hooks, and we're going to jump into that. But if you're new to the channel, you can go back and surf. I just did one on beaver baits, the evolution of beaver baits, and then I did one on how to increase your hookup ratio with the plastics that you already use, just showing you how little tricks I do to trim them down. So let's talk about the gauge hooks. So before we get into the thickness of hooks, I'm going to set the tone, okay? I'm going to set the tone, and I'm going to portray it like a little storytelling. Call it storytelling time. I don't know. All right. So if you were headed to the doctor, right? You're headed to the doctor and you got to get a shot. We know we all hate shots because we know the pain's coming, and we see the big needle and we all get freaked out. Maybe not all of us. Some of you may be tough. But if that doctor came out with a gauged hook like this, right? And he said, hey, we're going to, stick and inject you with whatever chemicals they want to inject you with. You're going to look at that gauged needle, aka hook. You're going to look at that needle and be like, dude, you're going to have to push like big time to get this gauge hook to go in and penetrate my flesh, get it in where he needs it, much less going in a vein. So I'm going to be a little bit more apprehensive if that doctor came out with a gauge hook like that. Now, if he comes out with a gauged hook like this gauge, right, you're going to be a little bit more, open to him saying, hey, I'm going to stick you with this needle. We're going to give you some medicine or chemicals, and we're going to inject you with that. I know it's going to hurt, but it's going to penetrate my muscle. It's going to penetrate my skin. It's going to get through this outer layer way easier than it will with a thick gauge. Now, I'm just laying the storyline. I want you to keep that storyline in mind for the rest of this video, because I'm going to reference back to the doctor explanation through the rest of this video. So let's talk about gauges. Gauge hooks are kind of known for flipping. They're, power, these big guys who talk about, the guys that use these giant gauge hooks, and there's a lot out there and companies out there that have these enormous gauge hooks. They're like the muscle car guys. It just looks mean. It looks bad. It just looks like it's going to jab him. And it could. And it could. But these guys with these muscle cars who have all this loud noise and all this, and the performance of it really is not any better. It may be worse. It's kind of the way I look at these hooks. Yes, we got thin gauge hooks and thick gauge. So think about this. A lot of the thicker gauge hooks are known for flipping, okay? And your choice is going to be flipping. But I want you to think about this. If I'm fishing, let's say a ledge, okay? And I'm making 50 to 60 yard casts with, whatever it may be, a big worm, it could be a shaky head, it could be a, whatever, a football jig. My choice, that's a long distance, right? My choice of hook is what is going to penetrate a lot easier, okay? What gauge hook do you think is going to penetrate a lot easier? A thinner gauge hook or a thick gauge hook, okay? And guys, listen to me. There's not a bass on this planet that can straighten out a hook. Now, don't trump me in the comments and say, I caught an 18-pound. That's a one in a lifetime. type of deal, and typically they're using live bait and little tiny hooks. So all these big bass are being caught on live bait, tiny hooks, or whatever it may be. So these size hooks, even this one, like the flipping hooks we use, that's almost getting into tuna fishing size hooks. And we're fishing for bass, the biggest sissy in freshwater fishing. A bass is such a, think about this. When you throw out there and, watch anything, Bassmasters, FLW, BPT, there he is. All right. And most of the time he's already skiing across the water. Got him. Or if you're flipping, you're like, he's in the boat. Guys, we're talking about fish that are sissies. They truly are. They're sissies. So I know people like I hear these people, I had one straighten out my hook. Well, if he straightened out your hook, it's your fault. It's your dumb fault for, number one, having your drag set too tight. Two, you were probably using too big of a power of a pole. You set the hook too hard. You had too big a braid on. I don't know. Those 4 factors are your fault. If you set the hook that hard when he's that far away and straightened out your hook, that bass didn't pull. He didn't pull, and I couldn't straighten out this hook if I tried. So if he straightened out your hook, it's your fault. Not the hook's fault, your fault. Set your drag right. Use the right hook power. Setting hook power. Use the right rod. All those things factor into it. I mean, that's like a whole nother different topic, but let's stick to the gauge of hook. So now the question is, hey, Dave, when do you tell me what gauge hook? What is the perfect gauge hook? Well, again, my tips and techniques or hacks, as you want to, I'm taking this to another level, okay? If you're an average fisherman watching this and you don't have, say $150 to buy each gauge hook and for each application, guys, what I'm talking about is on the professional side. Okay. Is there like a middle gauge hook that can just suit any style of fishing? Excuse me, I got the hiccups. Yeah, there is. Okay. But when you're on the top level of fishing, it is very important that you study the gauges of the hook for the application you're using. So let's get into that. I already mentioned that if I'm fishing a ledge, I'm going to want a smaller gauge hook, okay? I'm not talking about a light wire, like a super fine wire, but if I'm throwing a football jig, I don't want a giant gaff on my football jig. I don't want it. Why? Because I'm 50, 60 yards away trying to jam something up, maybe in his skull or whatever. I want a thinner gauged hook on my football jig, okay? The reason being is long cast. Now, let's get to flipping applications or tight, whether you're flipping docks, lay down trees. We're a little bit closer. Now, the hook power is going to be a lot more intense. When I mean intense, you're only 10 feet away. We're not going to have line stretch. You may have an overpowering rod. And for you braid flippers, I will suggest this. Use I had to learn how to trump my hook set with a little bit lighter of a rod. I like medium heavy to heavy action rods all the time. Typically, I'm on the heavy action rods. I know it's opposite of what you're thinking, but the idea is penetration of the hook in the fish's mouth. If that fish, now think about this, if that fish goes past the barb, right, and it pops through and his mouth or his flesh is sitting in this J, if you lose him, it's 100% your dumb fault. It's your fault, not mine, not the hooks. It is your fault. That fish should never get enough slack to back out. The barb is there. And if you set the hook too hard and maybe tore a lot of flesh off and you rip the hole, if you play him right, he's not getting off, guys. He's not. So part of being a great angler is understanding when to apply pressure, when to release pressure, when to give, when to take while you're fighting a fish. I suggest go to saltwater, fight a lot of fish in saltwater because typically you don't get that in it. So we're talking flipping application. Flipping application is this. I do want a big J in my flipping application. So what I mean by that is, as you can see, this is about a 1/2 inch of a J hook. It's got a big, long section of J. I don't need a thick gauged hook. And I'm going to tell you why I don't like a thick gauged hook. It's because of this. Here's a flipping style bait, right? Oh, yes. All right. Where did that hook go? All right. Here's a flipping style. Now, this is called a heavy flipping hook, right? Look how bulky and big, and it just like draws attention to you. You're like, ugh. And you almost lose focus of the bait because this is just and in clear water, whether you're punching mats or you're flipping docks, you can't just use this giant gauge for every application. That's where I'm talking about on the higher end of things. Now watch, I just took that off. Now I'm going to put a little bit thinner. This is twice less the size of that gauge. I don't know the gauge, guys. Don't ask me. I don't know. But now look at this. Now look at that application right there. That looks a lot more intriguing, a lot more like, okay, yeah, I can still see the bait and that's not overpowering my sight of what I'm focused on. Do you need a thick gauge? I'm going to go back to the doctor. Penetration of the skin, penetration of whatever you're trying to get through. And think about this. A bass's mouth, he's called a largemouth for a reason. He's got a big, large mouth. And you got a smallmouth who technically is a big mouth anyways. But, relatively speaking, a smallmouth is fairly big anyways. So if your hook happens to go deep inside their mouth and try to go up through their skull structure, through the top of their mouth, what do you think is going to penetrate even more, right? A thinner gauge or a medium-sized gauge or a giant gauge, okay? You guys, hopefully I'm driving the point home to you on when it comes to selecting gauges. Now, we could talk about drop shotting with hooks. This is the finesse of finesse, right? There's some hooks out there that have that slick coating on them. I don't know what to think about it. I use some of them. Aaron Martins actually has, Berkeley came out with this coating years and years ago. It faded out and now it's back into play. I've used them. I like Aaron Martin's way of thinking. The smaller gauge is a better. So now let's get into drop shot. Your selection of drop shot hooks. They've even got, on Texas Rig, they got medium wire hooks and light wire hooks. This is for ultra clear water. This is for, I reckon, a little bit less clear water, okay? I have them both. Guys, this is my living. This is how I make pay my bills. Yes. Do I have both of them? Yes. Do I know it helps? Absolutely. Do I know what I just told you about the flipping hooks? Absolutely. And you guys, I know how you are. When I talk, I speak majority, not minority. Majority of the time, I'm going to tell you what is the best option. Don't comment below and trump me and say, well, I used a thick gauge hook and I caught 5 bass. Oh, whoa, really? You caught 5 bass? Oh, well, I used a light wire hook. I had 10 bites. I lost 2, but I caught 8. I kicked your hind end on a light gauge hook. Why? Because I got more bites than you did. So guys, don't trump me. I'm giving you the goods on what you should apply this to. So I'm not sure if I've covered everything. Drop shot hooks, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But guys, it is important. Ultra clear water, gauges of hooks do matter, okay? They do matter. Again, if you're new to the channel, go back and surf around a little bit, guys. Coming up 1 week away from my 1-year anniversary, and we have grown, thanks to you guys, 15,300 subscribers. I hope we can double it. You guys have it. And hit that like button, guys. And I know you hear us say it, but this helps the channel grow. Like, whatever their computer is picks up on it. If you enjoy these videos, hit that like button, because I think YouTube helps share it more or whatever. If you enjoy these videos, hit the like button. I really do try to comment back to anything that you guys comment on, and I'm going to give you the double outro. Thanks for watching.